Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for your attendance this evening. It's the first time thought about doing this, so we'll see how it goes. This is a concept which a number of overseas federations have tried, and I thought it was about time that we tried it in England. So for those of you that don't know who I am, I'm Nick Heckford. I'm the officials group lead for Volleyball England. I've been an international referee for the last 13 years. So I know something about the rules, maybe not everything. So if you do find that you have a question or a challenge, then please put it in the chat and we'll pick it up. Okay, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the presentation. We're going to look at the actual wording of the rule regarding service, and we're going to look at some video. And then how the guidelines deal with some of the rules, and we'll look at the casebook as well. But if you have any questions for yourself, then please put them in the chat, and we'll cover those at the end. So that's how we're going to do it. So we'll crack straight on then. So the purpose of the session, as I said, we'll use the current rules of game, which are the 2017 to 2020 version. There will be a new set of rules coming out now, probably after the Olympic Games in Tokyo. Fingers crossed they happen. Normally, it's each Olympiad we have an update to the rule book. So we're using the current rule book. We'll look at the guidelines and the casebook, which were released also in 2020. Okay, so the definition of service is that service is the act of putting the ball in play by the back right player in the service zone. And that definition tells us quite a bit about service. It tells us about some of the other rules which are linked to it as well. So rule 8.1, the ball is in play from the moment of the service hit. So until that point, the ball is not in play. Okay, but once the server has hit the ball is now in play. So that then brings in the rules around the ball in play. Also, it highlights the fact that in Rule 7, we talk about the positions of the teams, and that 7.6.2 tells us that when the receiving team gains the right to serve, the player in position number 2 rotates to position number 1 to serve. Okay. Now, some of you that have been with the game a very long time will know that back before, I think, 2000, the server had to serve from a particular part of the service zone behind the end line. And that's probably the reason why the player in position 1 is the server, because that position sat behind that position on the court. So if we look at the court, we can see that the service zone is behind the end line in the free zone. The service zone now extends for the width of the court, so 9 meters wide, and a minimum of 3 meters of the free zone in depth, up to a maximum of 6.5 meters. And the server can serve from anywhere within the service zone. Now, the two service zone markers, which are marked just 15 centimeters outside the court, they're an extension of the sidelines of the court, and they are an imaginary extension right to the end of the free zone. And the server must take off from within this space. So who decides who's going to serve? So the first service in a set is determined by the toss, and also the first service in the fifth set. So we look at them. Rule point 7.1 says that before the match, the first referee carries out a toss to decide upon the first service and the sides of the court. If a deciding set is to be played, a new toss will be carried out. So what we get from the toss is that the captain has the captain that wins the toss has the right to make a choice. And that choice is whether they serve or whether they receive, or whether they take court A or whether they take court B. And they can make any of those choices. The other captain then gets to choose the opposite. So if the team that wins the toss decides to serve, then the other captain may choose which court. And if the team that wins the toss decides on which court to use, then the other captain decides on whether they wish to serve or receive. And the service, the first service of a set, always starts at in the same court. Okay, so if the first service is in court A of set 1, then until set 5, the first service in sets 2, 3, and 4 will also be in court A. The service order, we get people talk about this, it's the rotation in general parlance. The service order is determined by the lineup sheet. So this is why the lineup sheet is really important. It's very important that once the coach has written out the lineup sheet and given it to the second referee, then the second referee and the scorer make sure that they have checked the lineup sheet for any obvious errors, and the scorer will check to make sure that all the players that are noted on the lineup sheet are on the roster marked on the signed score sheet. Okay, so after the first service in a set, the player to serve is determined by the fact that when the team receiving serving team wins the rally, the player who previously served serves again, or if the receiving team wins the rally, then they rotate one position clockwise, and the player who has rotated to the back right position, or position 1, will go to serve. Now, the scorer controls the service order, but it's always a good idea as first referee just to make a check to see that you know who served the ball last. It does help in a lot of situations if you know what's going on. And similarly, when you're looking at the receiving team in preparation to make the service authorization, you have a quick look at the player, make sure that you know the player in position 2, because if the receiving team wins, you know that's the player you're expecting to go into the service zone to serve. And it really does help knowing that, and can help if you get any problems with the service order. So the authorization of the service, there is some really key wording here, and the key wording is that the first referee authorizes service after having checked that the two teams are ready and the server is in position of the ball. It is really, really important that you check that both teams are ready, and again, the server needs to be in possession of the ball. They don't need to be ready to serve. They don't need to be in their favorite position in the service zone to serve. They just need to be in possession of the ball, and then you can authorize service. Okay, so if you're thinking about how long does it take between the end of one rally and the start of the next, in most international competition, a duration of about 15 seconds plus the time it takes for the server to serve after the authorization is roughly how much time there is between rallies. So about 20 to 25 seconds in total. But let's have a consideration of the next slide is going to be a video. And what I want you to do is, what you'll see the first referee authorize the serve using the appropriate signal, but also watch the server and watch what the server does with the ball. And is it something that you feel is correct? And should the referee have authorized the service in this situation? So let's have a look at this video. So there's the service authorization. Okay, so we can see that the player did an awful lot with the ball before they came to serve. So the player who previously served serves again, or if the receiving team wins the rally, then they rotate one position clockwise, and the player who has rotated to the back right position, or position 1, will go to serve. Now, the scorer controls the service order, but it's always a good idea as first referee just to make a check to see that you know who served the ball last. It does help in a lot of situations if you know what's going on. And similarly, when you're looking at the receiving team in preparation to make the service authorization, So if we let's just have a look at that again. And we can see that the service authorization is now, the player then throws the ball up, they juggle with the ball, they bounce it, and then they're prepared to serve. They throw it up for, in this case, a jump serve. And what is key to do as a first referee is to, when you watch the server for the first time in a set, in the first set, serving, and obviously if they come on as a substitute whenever they first go to serve, look at their routine, understand what they're going to do, because most servers will have a routine and they will know how long their routine takes. But what we're not in the position of doing is allowing them to take as long as they like. So in this situation, the first referee has seen that the server has got the ball, it's bounced into them well, they've caught it, and then they walk with their away from the court to the back of the court, and then they throw it in the air. Now all of this is taking up time, and it's taking up this 8 seconds that they've got. Now in this particular instance, this server, when they begin to release the ball, has already used all of the 8 seconds that they're allowed to serve. Okay, so the clip unfortunately doesn't go on to determine whether the first referee decides that the server has taken too long or not. But what you're trying to do is to just understand whether the server is just trying to slow the game down, and with their process. And if they do this process of walking to the back of the service zone all the time and juggling the ball and bouncing it a lot, then the idea is the earlier in the process you authorize the service, the quicker you will get the game flowing again and the server will serve. If they continue to take too long, and I mean too long, and we all have to count how 8 seconds, and various techniques for doing so. If you feel it's gone well over 8 seconds and there's still no prospect of a service, then within your right to get to whistle the service as a fault. So let's try and move on to that point then. Okay, so if the server is not coming normally to the service zone or doesn't accept the ball from the ball retriever if you've got them in your match, then they're making an intentional delay, and you can use a delay sanction in that case. So for example, if the server waits in the middle of the court, doesn't pick or picks the ball up and then doesn't go into the service zone. So in our game, we don't have ball retrievers very often, so the two teams are responsible for passing the ball between each other. So if the ball is rolled under the net and the server picks it up but doesn't go into the service zone, then they're intentionally delaying the game. So it probably will be right to use a delay sanction in that case. You can only authorize service if the server is in the service zone and they have the ball. So in the previous video, the player was ready to receive the ball. Clearly, they were already in the service zone. So as soon as they received the ball, the referee quite rightly authorized the service. And that starts the 8 seconds that they have to serve. So the other point of this part of the rule is that both teams are ready. And it's really, really important that you have a process for checking that both teams are ready. Normally, you would start with the receiving team, and then you would look at the serving team, and then you look at the server. And what you're looking out for is either of the two teams not being ready, and you then have to decide whether they are actually delaying the game and not allowing the server to serve. So it's quite important that you go through that process, but also, as we'll see later in a couple of videos, that you actually take in the information that you see on the court and that you know what's going on. And that is for both referees to know, mainly for the first referee. But if the second referee knows something's happening on court and the first referee has not seen it, then the second referee has to stop the first referee. So in that instance, make sure you know what's going on. Okay. So the execution of the service. Now, the service has to be hit with one hand or any part of the arm after being tossed. Now, it's pretty difficult to hit the ball with your shoulder or the arm near the shoulder. So this is pretty much going to be anywhere from the elbow down to the hand, but mostly it'll be the hand. But one thing is clear here: the ball must be released and it must be tossed or tossed. So just hitting it out of the hand is a fault. It's not allowed. Okay, but if the player takes their hand away and the ball is dropping and then hit, as it was if a player hits the ball at underarm, and it does happen, then that is a release. It doesn't. The rule doesn't say that the release has to be in a certain way. But as I said with the previous case of the video, when we saw that player juggling the ball and bouncing it, it's quite clear that when they're doing so, they're not releasing the ball for service. It's quite clear that their release for service was when they threw the ball for the jump serve. Okay, and the same will be is if a player hits a float serve, then there will be a clear release because the ball will need to be above their head. Okay, so just look to make sure the ball is released and hit out of the hand. Okay, and they're only allowed to attempt this once. Now, before 2000, those of you that have a long memory will know that you had a specific amount of time, and if you didn't hit the ball the first time, you were allowed another go. That was removed from the rules after the 2000 Olympic Games. So now it's only one toss. If they get it wrong, they get it wrong. It's one toss and they have to hit the ball. So if they've overthrown it, they can't retrieve it and have another go, etc. So you should pay attention to the actions of the server in the release. Now, the next video is a very strange case, but I can understand why it occurred. So, as you can see from this passage of play, the first referee authorises service, and then the player from Qatar volleys the ball because they've thrown it too far and they're not close enough to it when they need to play it. So he volleys the ball over. Now, the first referee has not gone through the process because you're not used to there being service faults of execution with the hand. The first referee has kind of forgotten that this is a fault. So the player is not allowed to volley it and they're not allowed to dig it. Okay, and it's happened, and it happens in some, and this is a World League Group C match. So the referee has kind of thought, well, I don't know, is that a fault or not? Now, we know from the previous slide that this is clearly a fault. But have a look at the Mexican player number 13 in the front court, if we watch it again, after the point is finished. So look at him now. He's okay. So he appears to be the player on the court that thinks that something is wrong and doesn't quite know whether it is wrong or whether it's right. He appears to be the only player there that's kind of looking at it going, you know, was that right? Was that service okay? Okay. So in this particular case, this is clearly a fault. The service has not been hit with one hand and therefore is a fault. Okay, so it happens to even the best referees, that because it's a fault that you don't see very often, sometimes you start questioning yourself as to whether you understand the rule correctly. We'll just have a look at it once more. And it's quite lucky, actually, in this case that Mexico won the point. It would be interesting to know what would have happened if Qatar had won. So the next point on the execution of service is that the server must not touch the court, that's the end line, or the zone outside of the service zone. So what the guidelines say here is that the first referee and the corresponding line judges must pay particular attention to the position of the server at the moment of the service hit or the takeoff for a jump service. So the server may start their service motion outside the service zone but they must be inside the service zone, fully inside the service zone at the moment of their foot leaving the floor before the final contact for service. So if they are running, then it's only the last foot contact that you count. If they jump from both feet and as a standing jump, then both feet must be in the service zone. If they're on a run and jump off one foot, then only that last foot must be in the service zone. But at the time that that occurs, they must not have touched the end line. So the key point to note here is the service hit rule here doesn't make any mention of where the ball is. Okay, it's the player that's important, the player's last contact with the service zone. Okay, so some servers that are jump servers will land a considerable distance inside the court, up to 3 and sometimes maybe 4 meters inside the court. As long as their takeoff was outside the court and in the service zone, it's a legal service. Okay. Now, if there is a fault here and the server steps on the end line, then you would use a version of diagram 22 and you would point to the end line. Yeah, you just point to a spot towards the back of the court, and that will everyone will understand what you are signaling at that point. If you are lucky to have a line judge, then the line judge should have waved and pointed at the end line to signify that they have also seen the server contact the end line. So let's see an example. So this has got some wording on it. Okay, 2 examples here, one a fault and one not a fault. Okay, so on that one we could see it from the camera quite far back from the court that the foot touched the end line. So this is clearly a fault. This isn't my wording, by the way. I borrowed the video. So now let's look at another example. And in that case, the service was an ace, but the USA, I think it's the USA, have challenged the service as to whether it was a fault for the server contacting the end line. And as we can see from the video challenge, that there was no fault. The server was almost centimetre perfect on where they took off from. Now, sometimes it's important for you to understand what difference perspective will make on such a decision. Because simply when you're looking at the end line and the server's foot, sometimes it will appear that the server's foot is over the end line when in fact it may not be. So just be careful that you're not allowing your perspective as a first referee to make what is a very close foot to the end line, thinking that that actually has touched the end line. Just be careful that you are not calling very, very marginal differences because of your perspective from the referee's stand. Okay, so let's have a look at this. If this one will work as well. Okay, this is the same video again. So we'll just see it through once more and then we'll move on. So you can see here that line judge number 2 was very attentive. You can see them leaning in to watch the line carefully when the player came in to serve. So again, the line judge at position 2 was very attentive there. So that should give the players confidence that the line judge is actually watching. Although from the USA side, it looked as though the player was touching the end line. Okay. Okay. So the next part of execution of the service, as we've talked about before, is that the server must hit the ball within 8 seconds after the referee authorizing service. So when you authorize and you bring your arm across your chest, then you whistle just before you make that action. Okay. But if we remember that first video, we talked about the fact that the player probably used longer than 8 seconds. Once the if a service is executed before you as a referee have authorized the service, all you do is stop play immediately and indicate to the teams that the service will happen again, that you didn't authorize the service. Just remind the server that they must wait for the whistle and your authorization signal, and in this case you would stop the play and you would allow them to serve again. Okay. If you see a player start their service action just as you are about to blow the whistle, then in some cases it's easier to allow them to serve without to go through the motion of serving, and you stop it and restart it with the correct process, than to try and get your whistle in, because you may disorientate the server. So just let them, in that situation, if they've gone too early, just let them hit the ball, stop the play, and authorize the service again. It's a better way of dealing with that situation, rather than trying to get your whistle in to allow the first attempt to be legal. So screening. Now here's a subject which gets everyone worked up. The rule says, and it's very clear, the players of the serving team must not prevent their opponent through individual or collective screening from seeing the server and the flight of the ball. Now, the most important word in that rule is "and." From seeing the server and the flight of the ball. So if the player can see the flight of the ball but not the server, or they can see the server and not the flight of the ball, then that does not make it a screen. Okay, so the rule goes on to say a group of players or a player of the serving team makes a screen by waving arms, jumping or moving sideways during the execution of the service, or by standing grouped, and in so doing hides both the server and the flight of the ball until the ball reaches the vertical plane of the net. Now, by the definition of this rule, a jump serve can never be a screen. Okay, the diagrams in the rulebook show you what a collective screen might look like in terms of what it looks like as a plan. Obviously, you have to take into account the height of the players and how close together they are standing, and you have to take into account how closely the ball flies over the top of them. Okay, and if you determine it's a screen, then diagram 12 is the one you need. It's the same one as a blocking fault, and that's the one you would use. But if you're going to call a screen and a team is screening, it will screen from the beginning of the first set. So if you haven't called a screen right at the beginning of the first set, and you don't decide to call a screen until set 3, then you're going to get some problems as a referee. So if you don't feel it's a screen the first few times you've seen it, then it's unlikely to become a screen later in the match, unless the players do something clearly obvious, like waving their arms, jumping around, or moving sideways and doing it. Okay, so just be careful on this one. But screening exists, and it is a fault. Just because it's not called doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But this is one of those rules that's there to help us and save us from some very bizarre and strange things that would happen if this rule did not exist. Can you imagine all sorts of stuff that would go on from the serving team if there was no rule to prevent them screening? So this is one of those rules that is in there to make sure that something really bizarre doesn't happen. And if it was removed, you could guarantee that would occur. So the guidelines, the referee guidelines, they re-emphasize the point that it is preventing their opponent from seeing the server and the flight of the ball. And both criteria must be satisfied. So the faults during the service. Now this is where we get some interesting situations, because we can have faults that occur at the point of service. We can get some faults that occur after the point of service, and we can get some faults that occur somewhere around that time that you have to work out when things happen and in what order. So faults made faults that would lead to a change of service even if the opponent is out of position would be the server violating the service order or committing a rotational fault, which is the same thing, that's the terminology from the rules, or they do not execute the service properly. So they don't hit it with one hand, they don't hit it within 8 seconds, they contact the end line, they're outside the service zone, those rules. Faults that occur after the service hit, the service will become a fault if it's been correctly hit, unless a player is out of position. If the ball then touches a player of the serving team or fails to cross the vertical plane of the net completely through the crossing space, it goes out or it passes over a screen. So we have two sets of faults going on here. We have the faults of the service execution and we have faults of the service hit. And if a player is out of position, that occurs between those that execute the service and those that come afterwards. Well, let's just go back there and just remind us that if the ball does not cross the plane of the net, then you use diagram 19 and you just touch the top of the net band or point your hand towards the top of the net band. If the ball hits the net, post, ropes, antenna outside of the net, then it can be signaled out, or if it goes out, having crossed the crossing space. Okay. So serving and positional faults. So if the server makes a fault at the moment of the service hit and the opponent is out of position, then the service fault will take precedence. Okay, so a server touches the end line and the receiving team is out of position, then it is the serving team that is penalised. If the service hit has been correct and the ball then subsequently doesn't cross the plane of the net or goes out, then it is the receiving team's positional fault that has taken first and is sanctioned. Okay, so you just need to remember this in order. And I've tried to sort of show it in a graphic of service execution, positional fault, service becomes a fault. Okay, so just think of that order of how this fault is counted. Okay, so this is where service starts becoming part of lots of other rules like positional faults. Okay, so positions are an important aspect of what goes on around service. Okay, and we will return to positions at a future chat. Okay, so what other issues do we have when we're serving? So consequences of not checking. So we talked about having your routine of, are both teams ready and has the server got the ball? So both teams are ready, so you must check that you have the right players. So you're looking for 6 players on court for the receiving team, 5 players on court for the serving team, and 1 in the service zone. And you need to be aware of whether you have a libero which is going to replace a player, and whether that replacement has already taken place, or whether you're expecting a replacement and it hasn't taken place. Because these things may change the teams that you have in front of you. Okay, so the next example, have a look at this. What do you think of this? So this is a match in the Italian league, I think, by the looking at the court. Okay, and we can clearly see that the team that is in black has only got 5 players on the court, and the server is now either looking at the replacement player or the libero saying, where were you? Okay, so in this situation, the first referee has given them the point, hasn't noticed there's only 5 players, and I would imagine that the follow on from this is that the team in white will complain. Now, what to do in this situation? We'll come to that in a second. There we go again. So just the 5 players, and luckily they block. Now this rally should never taken place, and because you don't have enough players on the court, it hasn't taken place. Okay, you cannot award a point for it. It hasn't happened. Okay, so once you realize in this situation, you must either, as soon as you realize, stop the rally if it's still going on, or if the rally's finished, you then must make sure that you and your second referee, or first referee and the second referee, know that the rally does not count. Even if the team in this case, if the team in white had won the rally, they still wouldn't get the point. The rally has not taken place. Okay, let's consider another situation. Look at the team in white and look what happens. Here we go. This is from France. How many players are on court now? There's 6 on court at the moment, and then the libero steps into the court. I don't know whether they're wet, and the first referee's authorized service. It's a bit chaotic. The white team wins the rally. The blue team knows that something's clearly wrong. The only people that appear to be bemused by it is the first referee, perhaps. Okay, so let's have a look at this one again, and I'll see if I can stop it at the right time. Just let it play through. So if you look at the start of this rally, we'll see that I think the team in white is expecting a substitution. One of the players that should be back row is actually stood near the substitution zone, and only when he realizes that the service is going to take place does he run backwards to try and get in position. Yeah. Now what's happened towards the end of this clip, you'll see, is that for some reason the white team have been awarded the rally. Okay, what we should be seeing is the rally being replayed. Okay, and this is casebook 2.5 if you want to look it up. So as soon as either the first referee or the second referee knows that something is wrong, they must stop. Now the second referee is looking at the receiving team on this court, and they will certainly know what the problem is. So at that point, they should be whistling and stopping the rally. So if you ever get this example and your second referee, just stop the rally. Say this: we're not ready. The first referee has looked at both teams, they're not ready, but he's authorized service. And then you see the player that probably should have been off for the libero tries to get off the court, and the libero steps sheepishly on the court. It's a bit of a mess. Okay, replay the rally, blue team to serve. No points awarded. Okay, but if you've done your service authorization check correctly at the start, you would never have authorized service, and you would be considering whether the white team in white were delaying the game. And this slide just says about that example about what you should do, and the fact that there is no sanction. You should just cancel and carry on. So here's a few casebook examples. I'm sure you've seen them. As soon as the player has hit the ball for service, the scorer signalled wrong server or rotational fault to the second referee who stopped the game. Is this the correct action by the scorer? Absolutely. As soon as the scorer knows it's the wrong server, it's wrong server as soon as the ball has been hit. The ball is in play from the moment of the service hit, and therefore that's the point at which you stop the rally. Now, it may be that some scorers may only recognise that once the rally is ended. If that's the case, the fault is still a positional fault, and therefore, regardless of who won the rally, that point is not awarded. It is the point given to the receiving team for the serving team being out of rotation. Okay, so in that situation, don't get pressured into if the receiving team has won a point or the serving team has won the rally that should have been stopped. Forget what happened, the outcome of that rally. It's the wrong server that takes precedence. Okay. Now, in the next casebook example, the serving team realises it's got the wrong server in the service zone, but the referee has authorised service. The correct server then enters the service zone ready to serve. Can the player serve? Absolutely, but they've got 8 seconds. So you don't authorise service again. You've authorised service. It's up to the team to make sure that their right player serves. So if they realise they're wrong and the right player goes into the service zone, they have 8 seconds to hit the ball. Okay, so you do not stop and start and authorise again. The first authorization still stands and they have 8 seconds. Okay. The next one talks about the server threw the ball into the air with his back to the court. He then caught the ball and immediately served before the end of the 8 seconds is allowed for service. Was this a legal action? Well, we saw from the very first clip that this is exactly what the server did. And yes, if they've got their back to the court, unless they serve over their shoulder, which you'll have to be careful, because if they do it the first time they serve, then they've pretty much got to do it every time they serve, because otherwise they would be effectively cheating. So you have to be careful about what the player's routine is. Frankly, I've not seen a player try and serve with their back to the court. So in this instance, of course, it's not the release. It's always the second. It will be the second time they release the ball. So just be careful about what the server's process is. The next casebook example says serve ball touched the net and the antenna on the first referee's side before being played by the receiving team. The first referee whistled for a service fault. Is this the correct decision by the first referee? Yeah, the ball's hit the antenna, and we know from Rule 8 that this is out. So therefore, the ball is out. So that is the example there. The fact that the ball actually went through the crossing space doesn't make any impact here. It's hit the net, but it's also hit the antenna. And then casebook 31 says Team A served, the ball hit the net and dropped towards the floor on A side of the net. A player from B reached under the net and caught the ball before it hit the floor. Is this allowed? Yes, unadvised, but it's allowed. So you would call the service a fault as soon as you were clear the ball was not going to cross the net, and clearly dropping down towards the floor on the side of the serving team means that it's not going to cross the net. So therefore, the fact that player B reached under the net and caught it before it hit the ground has no bearing on this. The ball is not going to cross through the crossing space, and therefore the service is a fault. And then 7.9 brings in whether after a rally a coach asked the second referee if his server was correct. The second referee checked the rotational order with the scorer and replied that the correct player was ready to serve. The first referee continued the match. Is this the correct process from the referees? You all know that the game captain is the only person allowed to talk to the first referee. So therefore, if the team is in doubt as to who his server is, it is the game captain that should ask the question of the first referee. Now, in practice, the game captain probably would ask that of the second referee. Normally, we don't particularly mind, but what we would do in this case is try and stop the coach from believing the coach can have a discussion with the second referee. So in this case, the information was correctly given to the team, but the first referee should remind the game captain that the coach should not talk to the second referee. And if they want to know who the server is, then the game captain should ask the question. Okay, and just a couple more examples before we see if there are any questions. After a service which was executed by the wrong server, the ball went out. When the rally was finished, the scorer signalled the rotational fault. How many points did the receiving team receive? I think we already covered this. The rally didn't take place because the wrong server hit the ball, so only 1 point can be awarded, and that is the point of the service fault. Okay, and let's just have a quick look at another example of where you need to look at your server and see what your server's up to. And this is a Polish league game. As you can see, the player has wiped their hand through their hair and has then wiped their hand all over the ball. So the referee has said, I don't like that ball. Take another one, take a dry one. Okay, and has not allowed play to continue until that. And the player realises that was the case. The other way this is done is when the players take the ball and they wipe it down their shirts, particularly when they're particularly sweaty, and they're not cleaning the ball, they are actually making the ball worse. So in that case, if you see that happening, you're quite within your rights to ask to change the ball. And in the National Volleyball League, we have 2 balls, so we have one that will be dry, so just change it for the dry one. Doesn't have to be anything more than that. Okay, just say, I'm not happy with you using that ball. Let's put it to one side so it dries, and we'll use the dry one. Okay, so just be aware of when that happens. All right, so that's pretty much a whistle-stop rush through the Rule 12 service. Question is, are there any questions that have come in during? And
yeah, sure. I'll jump in, Nick, if that's all right. Then I can help guide you through those questions. So yeah, thank you for that. It's a fascinating interrogation of that kind of area of the rules. If you haven't got any questions, please either raise your hand or pop them in the chat. But in the meanwhile, I'll go through a few that came in while you were going through the presentation. So the first one was from Nacho. Nacho said, what should we do in those situations where a player, and that's on either team, has 1 foot outside of the court? Can you authorise the service?
So I would say if it's a player that's near you, then the quickest thing to do is to tell them to get back on the court. Now we're not in the game of, we're not supposed to be pragmatists, but in some situations, if you're the second referee and the player's in front of you, or you can see the player, then just tell them to get on the court. If it's easy to do, and if you're in a relatively quiet sports hall, as some of our matches are, then that's pretty easy to do. You just say, number 6, get on the court. But if they are stood 1 foot on the court, 1 foot off the court, and you can't do anything about it, then it's a positional fault. So that's the situation you've got. But it's a silly positional fault. So it's one where if you can avoid it, I'm not sure that the other team is going to be too upset if you say, well, just get back into court.
Excellent. Second question we got from Ludden. I think this came in around the time of the clip between Qatar and Mexico. And Lud asked, what is the signal for a volleyed serve?
Signal for a volleyed serve is, can I quickly whip back through my... Okay, so it's a straight arm, diagram 10. So it's a straight arm that's raised. The arm is kept locked, elbow is kept locked, and it's brought from just below your waist and just bring it to just above your waist. It's a signal that is very, very, very rarely used, which is probably why you don't know it. I don't think I've ever used it, but that's what it is. It's that one.
Cool. Another question from Nacho, and again, this was around that Qatar-Mexico clip. What would you do if that player 13 that you picked out then in the white that had maybe clocked on that there's something should have happened that shouldn't have, and assuming he is the captain as someone else has picked up, comes to you and complains about the volleyed serve? So yeah, what would you do if that player comes to you and complains about the volleyed serve?
So I suppose it really depends on whether he won or lost the rally. If he's won the rally, then it's a thanks very much, Captain. You've got the point anyway. If he's lost the rally, then he's got a fair point, because that could lead to a protest. So because it's an incorrect interpretation or application, or an incorrect application of the rules. So the captain could come to you and say, look, ref, that service is not allowed. It's our point. And if you said, well, I'm not going to change my decision, you're quite right, within your right to change the decision. But if you said no, then he could say, well, I protest, and then you might have an issue. So in that situation, if he comes to you and says, I don't think that service was legal, ref, you're quite within your rights to just give yourself a bit of time, call your second referee over, have a quick discussion, and if you decide that you were wrong, then just admit it. I was wrong, and that service should not have taken place, and therefore was incorrect. It's a fault, and therefore correct yourself at that point. There's nothing to stop you doing that, and if it saves you from a protest, then that's the course of action you need to take.
Sound advice. We've got another one, a long one from RCG. I'll read. It's quite a long question, but I'll read it out for the benefit of those that haven't seen it and for those watching back. So this is around the clip where there's too many players on court, and RCG is just referring to a similar incident where it happened to him as well. In an NBL game, the serving team had 7 on court as the libero had failed to leave when the team rotated. He or she was the second ref and realised that there were 7 on court, but the first ref didn't and had authorised the serve. I blew my whistle when the ball was hit, as no one else appeared to have realised the error. Should I have blown as soon as the first ref authorised the serve rather than wait until the ball was hit?
As soon as you know that something's wrong in that situation, stop the match. So as soon as you can, because the rally's not going to take place. So it's not a positional fault because there are 7 players on court. Because you should have noticed that both the first referee should have noticed this and therefore not authorised the service. So in that situation, as soon as you notice there's something wrong, stop the rally and say, look, we can't have this rally because there are 7 of you. Now, come on. Either the libero's got to leave or the replacement player's got to leave, whichever way it is. You need to get ready. Now, the first referee, because you've stopped the match, the first referee at that point should then say, okay, I know I was wrong by not checking teams are ready, but you have now, your actions by having 7 players have stopped the match, so therefore this is a delay, and therefore you would expect a delay warning or penalty if they were at that stage to be given. But as I say, as soon as you recognise it, stop the match.
And we've got one final question in the chat from Clive Cooper, and this is around screening, and it sounds like it's from Clive's own experience then at local league level. And so Clive has said one referee said that when you're serving, team players were not permitted to hold their hands up in position. So players of the serving team had to keep their hands by their sides or below the shoulder height. He said, any thoughts? So assuming is that right or wrong?
You see it an awful lot. The way I approach it is players in the back row have no cause to have their hands up by their heads. If they feel that their server is not competent enough to get the ball past them without hitting them, then maybe they ought to stand well away from the server and then they wouldn't have to put their hands up. So I think if I see players in the back row with their hands on their heads, then I tell them to take their hands down, because the only reason it can be there is to try and create some form of screen. Players in the front row, slightly different, depends how tall they are. There's more chance that they possibly could get hit. But if their hands are up vertically above their heads, then I would just remind them. that you know, if their hands are on their heads, fine. Yeah, in the front row, fine, because they could get hit. If their hands are vertically above their heads, then all they can be doing is trying to create some form of barrier or screen. So in that situation, just tell them, take your hands down, otherwise I call a screen.
And just on that issue of, oh sorry Nick.
Yeah, go on. Yep.
I was saying just on that issue of screening, James Murphy's just come back at I think one of the points you're making there. So how can a player in the backcourt screen the ball?
So a player in the back row screens the ball. So for example, the server is going to float serve. So they're standing relatively close to the court, and the player goes and stands directly in front of them, within say a meter and a half. There's absolutely no reason. There is no benefit to the serving team of that player standing there, apart from trying to screen the server. So therefore, in that situation, that's one of the clear examples of where a back row player could screen. The other one is when you see the server's line, the front row players move across the court to stand together so that they are directly in front of the server, and the two back row players then go and stand directly behind them, so that in effect now you've got 5 players on the same server line. You see it happen, but if the back 2 players then step apart, so there is a gap between them, then it's very difficult then to class that as a collective screen. If they're standing next to each other and they're right behind the front 3 players and the server is directly behind them, then this is a classic collective screen. Now, then again, if the server then serves the ball diagonally across the court or throws it up or hits it quite high, it still can't be a screen, because you've got to remember that the screen can only be if the screen is trying to stop the receiving team from seeing both the server and the flight of the ball. So it's never clear cut, but those are the things you kind of look out for to make it look as whether the serving team is trying to screen or not.
Thanks, Nick. We've just got one final comment, and that's just from Clyde just agreeing that a similar incident where he's also called a screen. So yeah, thanks for that, Nick. That sort of brings us to a close of the questions there.
Yeah, that's great, and some great questions. And I know that that screening is always a point of contention between teams. Normally, you'll get it at least a few times a season, where one of the teams will complain. If you see it and you think it's a screen, call it. No problem calling it. But you have to remember that all of the elements of the rule have to apply. So, but don't be afraid to. But again, I would say if you wait until say the bottom end of the 3rd set, then maybe it's a bit late to start doing it. Call it the first time you think you've seen it. Right at the start of the 1st set, the teams will go, referee's on the ball. He knows what we're trying to do. We better stop this, otherwise it's going to be we're going to get called an awful lot for this. So do it early if you're going to do it. Be my advice. You have to be clever in these situations.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Nick. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you everyone for your questions. For taking part in this first session. Hopefully you found it enjoyable, and yeah, thank you for the engagement on that. Nick, I don't know if you want to do a bit of a preview then for the next session, in which we're hoping to hold on the 9th of December. For a proper announcement to go out next week, but yeah, just in the meanwhile, a bit of a save the date for the 9th of December.
Yeah, so yeah, we're gonna run the next one in 2 weeks. We're going to look at positions, which follows on nicely from service, because they're all interlinked. And positions is quite a good topic. It could be quite wide ranging for its impact on the game. But also, one of the things I'd like to do is that in between some of these more technical presentations, we will have some more open forums whereby we'll just look at a very small part of a rule and we'll open it up for discussion, which I think will work really well as well. So I really do thank all of you for giving up your time to be on the call, and I hope that service has not been too dry a subject for you, and that you'll join us for the next one.